Hi everyone. I just want to take a moment to show you some Excel basics. We'll be using Excel throughout this course, and for those of you who have not had much experience in Excel, I'm just going to be showing you the basics as to how to get around and our most basic formulas. So what you see here right now is just on the page of my Excel spreadsheet. I've got an income statement, a statement of retained earnings, and then a balance sheet. When I go over to this next tab, I've set these same financial statements up very much like the first Excel simulation that you have on Connect. So we'll go over that in a minute. But first, I just want to show you what Excel formulas are. So what we have here on the income statement, we have our sales revenue, various expenses, and then net income. For items like sales revenue, we simply have to type in the information. We have to put information into Excel. The same is true with all of our expenses. But formulas come in when there's some type of calculation to be made. So for example, here with total expenses. If I click on a cell that simply has typed information, you'll see that that information was physically typed in. So for example, if I click here on sales revenue, I can tell that this was typed in because if you look up here, it tells me what is in this cell. It shows me 30,000, meaning that someone actually typed in 30,000 into the cell. The way you type in any cell, let me click over here, you just click on the cell and you can begin typing and type whatever you want. You can type words, letters, symbols, anything. So that's how these numbers got here. But then what about total expenses? Someone could have gotten out their calculator and added up all of these expenses and then typed in 27,500 into Excel. However, if you're manually adding or calculating things on an outside calculator, you're really not doing yourselves any favors because that is exactly what Excel is meant to do. So let me show you how you do that. If I click on this cell right here, you're going to see 27,500 is not typed into this cell. How do I know that? Because you can see up here, we have something that says equals C7 plus C8 plus C9 plus C10. What that is what we call a formula. I know it's a formula because anytime you see a cell and the information in that cell starts with equals, that is an Excel formula. When you type equals into Excel, it's simply telling Excel that you're wanting to use Excel like a calculator. So what do we have here? We're simply putting our information into Excel rather than calculating on our calculator. The same way that you would have added these up on your calculator, you would have added 15,000 plus 6,500 plus 4,700 plus 1,300 on your calculator to come up with this answer. You can do the same thing in Excel, but something about Excel that's really nice is you don't actually have to type in all those numbers. You could simply click on the cell, hit the equals sign, and then click on 15,000. You could type in 15,000 if you wanted, but it's much easier since the information is there. Simply click on the cell. And then on your keyboard, if you'll press Shift and then the button with the plus on the top left. That's how we make the plus come into our formula. So simply type on the 15,000, hit plus. Click on the 6,500, hit plus. Click on 4,700, hit plus. Click on 1,300, hit plus again. And when you're finished, simply press enter. So I'll show you again what that looks like. Let me clear this cell out. And you can see I say equals, I click, plus this, plus this, plus this, and press enter. So there's my answer again, 27,500. So then what's going on down here? Net income. Again, I could have taken out my external calculator and calculated net income, 30,000 minus 27,500. However, again, if you're doing that, you're not doing yourself any favors because you're having to double your work. All you have to do in Excel is, again, hit the equals sign, go into the cell, hit equals, And then tell Excel what you would have been doing in your calculator. You would have been entering in 30,000 minus 27,500. Because those numbers are already here in Excel, you don't have to actually write those numbers out. You simply say equals cell C5 minus cell C11, click enter or hit enter, and you have your answer here. So that's the basic addition and subtraction. Subtraction, right here you can see the minus sign here. You can find that on your keyboard. If you go up to the top, you've got your equal sign, which is right by your backspace button. Also on that same equals button is your plus button. You have to hit shift to make the plus come. And then to the left of that, that's where you have your minus sign. So you've got that there. Now let's come down here. Now we have the statement of retained earnings. Retained earnings, the beginning balance, that was just typed in there. There was nowhere that we could actually get that from at any point yet. But then what about net income? I could have typed in net income, but again, I'm doubling my work because I already know my net income number up here. I can simply what we call reference to that. So what do I mean when I reference? Instead of typing that in, you can see here all I've done is I clicked in this cell. I hit equals to tell Excel that I'm doing a formula or I'm looking at something, and I'm simply saying equals cell C12. That way I don't have to type in 2500 and it's right there. So equals, click on this cell and press enter, and there I have it. We happen to have some dividends. Notice there the dividends are shown in parentheses, and that is simply showing that that is a negative number. So we've got negative $2,000 here. So then how do we calculate retained earnings? Now above, when we added something, we added multiple items together by entering the plus sign after we clicked on every cell. Down here, what we need to do essentially is sum or add up these three items. We started with retained earnings of 0. We added net income, and then we'll need to subtract dividends. There's two ways that you could have done this, and I'm going to show you both ways. So first, let me get rid of what's here. So I could go here, and I could enter the equal sign, click here. I'm going to go ahead and click here, even though that's nothing, because later on after the first year of business, you might have something, or you would have something in retained earnings. So I'm going to go ahead and click there, even though essentially right now it's just like I'm saying plus 0. So I could say cell C18 plus cell cell C19, and then I need to add in these dividends. This is the same as what you would be doing in a calculator. Remember, dividends is in Excel as a negative number. So if I say minus cell C20, that's like saying minus a negative, which ends up being plus 2,000. I don't want to do that. So since Excel already knows this is a negative number, I'm simply going to say plus this item, and I've got my answer there, $500. Now, there's a nice function that I use most often in Excel, and it's called the sum function. Let me show you how that works. Instead of having to click on each of these cells individually and enter the plus sign in between, I can use the sum function. If you simply click on Excel, let me clear out this formula so we have a fresh palette. So I click here and I enter equals to tell Excel I'm going to do some kind of calculation. And if you're summing something, that's just another way of saying adding it up. So that's why this is called the sum function. All I do is I enter sum, and you can see Excel's thinking and recognizing that I'm putting in a formula that is embedded into Excel. But I'm simply going to say sum, and then I put in parentheses, and I click on the range of cells that I want to sum. So at this point, I'm going to click at cell C18. I keep my mouse clicked, and I simply highlight the cells I want to sum or add up. So we've got C18 through C20. That's what this is essentially saying. And then I end my parentheses and press enter, and there you go. I have the same answer. Up here, when I had to add up 5 numbers, or 4 numbers, this would have been easier than having to enter the plus every time. It's just quicker. And especially sometimes if you're using Excel, you might be adding hundreds of points of information and you don't want to sit there and click on every one and press the plus in between. So that's why that sum function is so easy. I'm going to show it again here. So equals the sum of these 4 items. And here we go, we still have the same answer. So that's just how we use Excel. I've attached the spreadsheet in Canvas so you can use it to play around with and get comfortable with formulas. I'll show you over here where there are some other formulas that you can look at on your own. They're still just looking at our basic addition and subtraction. But here we go. When I added up assets, I simply said sum these 3 items. I had liabilities, I had 2 of them, so I added those together, again using that sum function, just because I prefer the sum function rather than having to enter the plus sign over and over. Again here with stockholders' equity, I added these together. Let me get out of there. And then with total liabilities and stockholders' equity here, this is going to be the sum of total liabilities plus total stockholders' equity. So you can see all of those items there. So now I'm going to come over here to sheet 2. And if you've already looked at the Excel simulation on Connect, this sheet looks similar to what you're presented there. Formatting's a little bit different, but the basics are the same. So now that you understand Excel formulas a little bit, how in the world do you use that to come up with the calculations and put together the spreadsheet that you're required to do with the Excel simulation? So what I have here is just the income statement, the balance sheet, statement of retained earnings, and these yellow boxes are items that we need to solve for. Now, when you look here, if you understand relationships between these items and you also understand the order that you have to create your financial statements, you'll be able to solve for these different items using the relationships. If you do not understand how an income statement, statement of retained earnings, and balance sheets each work and then how they relate, then you're not ready to start the simulation, because this isn't simply solving for items using algebra. There is some algebra involved in solving for certain pieces of information. However, what is key is understanding the relationships, because that's how you begin to build information. So if you remember from my online lecture or from the classroom lecture, you always have to start with your income statement when you're creating your financial statements. That's because once you know your net income, you can then use that to help build your statement of retained earnings. And finally, you'll need to know your ending retained earnings number before you can finish your balance sheet. So let's look here. For the income statement, we know revenue and we know net income. The problem is that we do not know what office expenses were. We need to solve for that. If you understand that net income is the difference between revenues and all of our expenses, then we can solve for this one piece of missing information. If you were to take out your calculator and solve for this on your own, you would simply be putting into your calculator revenue minus salaries minus supplies minus income tax minus the net income. Whatever the difference is there must be what supplies expense is. Now with the Excel simulations, you cannot do your calculation on a calculator and then type in the answer. You have to actually use an Excel formula, which is what we were talking about when we were looking at the previous sheet. So how do I actually do that? Again, to start an Excel formula, I click on the cell. You can see the small box around here showing me that I'm here. And I'm going to hit the equals sign to tell Excel I need it to calculate for me. So the easiest way to do this, I'm not going to type in 30,000 minus all of these different items. I'm just going to click. It saves me from having to type in each number. So equals 30,000 minus this, minus this, minus this, minus this. If I hit enter here, I've got my answer. Office expenses must have been $4,700. All right. We finished everything we needed to do on our income statement. So let's move down here. We can now use the information from our income statement to help build the statement of retained earnings. So retained earnings, we're being told, started at 0. And next I need to add my net income. I have net income from above here. A lot of you will want to simply type in $2,500 because you can see it right above. But again, we've got to use Excel formulas. The easiest way to do this is simply press enter to tell Excel that you want to have Excel calculate something for you. In this case, we're not even actually doing a calculation. We're doing what we call a cell reference. The same way we could click on cells to add them together, we simply say equals this item here. And because we don't want to add anything to it, we just say enter, and there we go. We've got the number we need. Now, what about retained earnings down here? Retained earnings, remember, is going to be the sum of beginning retained earnings plus net income, or if we had had a loss this year, that would reduce retained earnings. And then also we've got some dividends, and dividends are by definition a reduction of retained earnings. Now I also want to note, and I noted this when we were going over the previous slide, dividends are already shown as a negative amount. So when we create our Excel formula to solve for retained earnings, I do not want to say minus this cell here, because that's essentially saying minus negative 2,000. The two negatives end up acting as plus 2,000 if you minus a negative item. So you've got to keep that in mind. Excel's going to read what you've already put into it, and currently it understands this is negative 2,000. So how do I calculate retained earnings? I could simply say equals this cell plus this cell plus this cell. But again, I prefer to use the sum function. I think it's easier, so I'm just going to say simply equals the sum, start my parentheses, and highlight these here. So we're all set there, 500. Moving over here, the balance sheet is where it's going to be most complex. You've got to look at what we have and begin solving and figuring out how to solve for these other amounts. So accounts receivable. There's no way of knowing what that is at this point because we don't even know what total assets is. So we can't do anything here yet. Let's move on. Stockholders' equity. What's missing? We don't know total liabilities in stockholders' equity, so we're going to have to wait there. But what about retained earnings? That's what we know. We just solved for that. So again, I'm going to use my formula to simply reference over here. If you were to hard key in 500 right here, the simulation is going to tell you you're wrong. Not because $500 is incorrect for retained earnings, but the key here is using Excel formulas. So you've got to get 500 over here by using a formula, not just typing it in. So I click here, press enter, and there's my 500. What can I do now? I now have enough information to add up total liabilities and stockholders' equity. All right, what would that be? It would be the total of my liabilities plus everything in these cells. So I could say equals the sum of these, and I ended my parentheses. So right now all I have is the sum of these two items, but this is asking for total liabilities and equity. So I'm saying the sum of these two items and then plus this item here. So 63,500. Now that I know total liabilities and equity, if you remember our basic accounting equation or the fact that on your balance sheet total assets should equal the total of liabilities and stockholders' equity, you now know what needs to go here. This item, to be correct, must equal total liabilities and stockholders' equity. So again, I reference there. And now I know total assets must equal $63,500. Now I can fill out my final cell. The same way that we solved for expenses, we can solve for accounts receivable because the sum of this plus this must equal $63,500. So I'll go ahead just the same way that maybe you would put it into your calculator. I'm simply going to say equals 63,000 minus this item minus this item. And here we go. That means accounts receivable must be 1,500. Now, if you were solving for this on your own, maybe you would have solved for it using a different formula or a different algebraic method. The same way that you can use your calculator to calculate things many different ways, as long as you're using a formula in these Excel simulations, you can calculate this a different way from how I did. This is just one of many ways to calculate or solve for the fact that accounts receivable must be equal to $1,500.